Hey guys, I want to start off this morning with some really good news. Our local, our local news down here in Florida is reporting that Florida had a 46% decrease in abortions since Roe v. Wade was overturned. But there's still work to do for us Floridians because South Dakota had zero, and I think Texas and Mississippi also beat us with the decrease. So just a reminder that we don't work in vain. God hears our prayers. You know, since I became a Christian, we've been trying to get Roe v. Wade overturned. And, we did our best to get pro-life candidates, and we get George Bush in, and the first justice he appoints is Harriet Miers, who's a pro-choice justice. And everyone's like, see, it doesn't matter. But it did matter because we also voted in a bunch of Republican senators who didn't even let her nomination get to the floor for a vote. And by the time 2015 rolled away, there were very few people that thought Roe v. Wade would ever be overturned. However, I had two scholars, and I don't remember if they said it on my show or if I knew they said it before, and I asked them about it. But Dr. Robert P. George, who's considered a legal scholar, I believe, and Dr. Francis Beckwith, who's also considered a legal scholar, they both were confident that if we had the right conservative judges, and when we say conservative, we don't mean politically, we mean originalists. They look at the law, what the law means, and they enforce the law. The liberal judges, the progressive judges, the activist judges make law. They say, well, this is what the law meant, but this is what it should mean. So this is why it's important to have originalist judges. And this is why conservatives get frustrated when we have conservative judges, because they don't change everything right away, because they're conservative. But anyway, one other person who was confident was Donald Trump. He said if he was elected, he said he's sure he'll have to appoint two, maybe three conservative judges, two or three judges, and he promised us they would be pro-life judges. And he said, well, like, matter of factly, they'll overturn Roe v. Wade. And the media laughed at him. Everybody laughed at him. And he did it. He got Roe v. He got what we've been praying for and asking for. But the work isn't done, because all Roe v. Wade did was put it back to the states. So conservative states like Florida, Texas, South Dakota, Mississippi, they're going to make it hard for women to kill their babies. But then these Democrat states run by Democrats, New York, New Jersey, Minnesota, California, in response to that, they made it way easier. So these states, you can literally have an abortion through the 9th month of your pregnancy. And in Minnesota, there were 10 recorded, doctors had to report this. And then once it got on the news, Tim Walz said, no, don't report it. 10 babies that were born alive, and the doctors let die on the table. So literally infanticide. And in these liberal states, this happens all the time. They just don't have to report it because it looks bad. So there's work to be done. There's work to be done. There's only so much our politicians can do. The rest is on us. It's on us, the church militant. Not only do we have to vote pro-life, but we have to educate people. We have to evangelize. We have to tell people the meaning of life. Like, God created us. He knitted us together in our mother's wombs. You have to be a complete science denier to say that an unborn child is not an unborn child. We have to educate people scientifically. We have to educate people religiously. We have to convert them. We have to convert their minds. And the one way we do this is through media. The one way we do this is through money. Give your money to places that are going to help the pro-life movement, not hurt it. I can't tell you how many, if I started naming them, you would be shocked how many companies, they don't advertise it, but if you look who they donate their money to, so many companies donate their money to the abortion industry. But there's one company that you have a choice. If you're buying or selling real estate, you have a choice. to deal with a 100% pro-life company that supports pro-life media to get the message out, to change people's hearts and minds. That company is called realestateforlife.org. And not only will you be helping unborn children, you're helping yourself, because they only employ Christian pro-lifers, but they're extremely professional, very experienced, and you're going to get a realtor with the utmost integrity and professionalism. So realestateforlife.org. Now, I always say sometimes I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. You know, when I came back to the church, one of the first books I read was Merchants in the Temple, Inside Pope Francis' Secret Battle Against Corruption in the Vatican. And it was kind of conspiratorial, and I don't like to peddle in conspiracy theories, but sometimes the facts are overwhelming, and a conspiracy is a conspiracy. And he gave facts, but I didn't connect it until recently. So he talked about, you know, the second biggest financial scandal in the church was the Vatican bank scandal. That's what Pope Francis was coming into. The first was Judas selling out Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, in case you were wondering. And in this book, he talked about how the Vatican was infiltrated by some dishonest workers, some Freemasons, some gay people that had an agenda, and Pope Francis was fighting against both of them. And he beat the he solved the financial crisis, and the Pope haters never gave him credit for it. And in fact, they always twisted it. And instead of me reporting this as a conspiracy, I always said these Pope haters are just grifters, you know. Some of them have an agenda, you know, just like the left. The issue is never the issue. You know, I would show over and over how they would lie about the Pope, how they would twist his words. It was like they wanted to destroy him. But I seen when I defended Pope Francis and I showed these people were liars, they got mad at me, unsubscribed from me, but their views kept going up. So I figured they were doing it for the grift. But the Epstein files came out, and come to find out, it was actually a plot to take down Pope Francis. And, you know, here's one from, here's an email. Steve Bannon to Epstein. So Steve Bannon is all over the Epstein files. This guy is done. Well, maybe not, because people, you know, I thought when I exposed YouTube liars, they would be done, but some people are just in their tunnel, and they'll believe. They have like this cult of personality, just believe who they believe. But Steve Bannon, I made videos years ago that he was like Judas Iscariot turning on Pope Francis. He was like Fredo from The Godfather turning on Trump. Trump literally fired him his first administration because every day there were leaks, and we found out that it was Steve Bannon leaking to his friends at the liberal New York Times, liberal CNN, liberal Washington Post. So Trump fired him, and then he writes a tell-all book bashing Trump and his family. I'm like, this guy is a Judas. And then Trump felt bad for him, and he did some crimes, and he was put into jail, and Trump felt bad for him and pardoned him, and then all of a sudden now he's on the Trump train again. But I'm like, you can't trust this guy as far as you could throw him. That's Steve Bannon. So it wasn't surprising to me when I heard he was all over the Epstein files, very tight with Epstein. And in this one email, he says, where is it? He says we're gonna take down our enemies, the Clintons, Xi from China, Francis, Pope Francis, and the EU. Come on, brother. And this is what these guys were doing. They knew their audience were conservatives. They knew conservatives wanted to take down China. We all know China is like our biggest enemy, you know. We all know the EU is in bed with China. You know, we all know the Clintons are corrupt. And then he throws in Francis. So we're like, Francis is a part of this? Steve Bannon, smart. He must be. And this is like the frog in the boiling water. And then he goes on to say, we are going to topple Francis. So there was an agenda. There was a plot. There was a conspiracy to take down Pope Francis. And then recently you've seen this. I posted this. You know, my friend sent me from X. You know, I'm not on X, but he sent me this. It says, John Henry Weston, one of the biggest Pope haters, Epstein was not a dumb sicko. He was an evil genius. He was a genius. And that genius, no doubt, is what led him to speak about the traditional Latin Mass. And what he's referring to, the email's right here, he's talking to somebody, Mother's Visa, I don't know, who looking for a Catholic church when he visits Epstein somewhere. And he's like, regarding the extraordinary form, the Latin Mass parish in Boston is Mary Immaculate of Lourdes. And he goes on, if you want a reverent Mass. So I don't know if he goes to Mass, but he was describing the Latin Mass as a good Mass. That this is where you need to go if you're a Catholic. And so a lot of people are appalled and they're like, man, John Henry Weston doesn't care about the child abuse, doesn't care about the women trafficking. He just thinks this guy is a genius because he likes the Latin Mass, or he talks about the Latin Mass. And it was kind of like weird. Like, why would he say that? Why would he say that? And then it got me thinking, not only did these Pope haters during Pope Francis's pontificate lie about him, and I'll give you a few examples in a minute, they ignored good things and bad things about the child abuse scandal of the church, which to any normal human being was the worst crisis. And they would talk about Pope Francis being the worst crisis, and they would, like the con artist playing 3-card Monte, they would have your eyes on something totally different. This crisis in the church, the church, Pope is going to allow gay priests, Pope is going to allow gay marriage, Pope is going to allow women priests. And all the time, everybody was angry and hating the Pope. They were missing the wonderful things, like Jason Barry, the guy who, the investigative journalist who broke open the sex abuse scandal of the Catholic Church. So Pope Francis is head and shoulders above his predecessors, fixing this problem. The problem is solved, and the facts show it out. You know, pre-Vatican II, there were thousands of these cases every year. You know, even before Pope Francis, there were hundreds. Pope Francis, 2012, 6, 13, 7, 14, 6, 15, 7, 16, 2, 17, 6, 18, 3, 19, 8. That's the last this book gives the statistics of the child abuse in the Catholic Church. But I Googled the latest one now, 2023. There were 3. You know, compare that to the public school systems in America. One city, Chicago, the public school district of Chicago had 3,000, over 3,000. I think it was like 3,300 in 2023. So the greatest crisis in the church was destroyed. They never talked about that. And then the bad stuff. Taylor Marshall, who was always bashing the Pope, never was shy to bash the Pope. Actually called him a heretic. Probably the first guy on YouTube to call him a heretic. He ignored his own FSSP priest, Father James Jackson, an FSS priest, I think it was like 2021. He never mentioned this guy, convicted of child abuse, child pornography. He was caught with 1,300 disgusting videos of child porn. 2,500 or 25,000 pictures of child porn. This was an FSP priest. I'm sorry, I'm hearing some noise. I thought I was the only one up. They ignored that. Just like they ignored the group that Vigano joined, excommunicated Carlo Maria Vigano joined a group created by Richard Williamson. And in France, they had 2 priests. They ignored this. Renegade Catholic order in UK harbors, okay, it was in the UK, harbors clergy accused of sexual abuse. 2 priests accused of abuse allegedly found refuge in Kent with Holocaust denier Richard Williamson, SSPX resistance. This is from 2017. And these 2 priests were convicted of thousands of child abuse. These 2 gay pedo priests. And the police found that they were being hidden by Richard Williamson. They knew. And that story was ignored. But it's not surprising to me, because twice excommunicated Richard Williamson ordained Carlos Uragati. So if you're not familiar with Carlos Uragati, he was a seminarian under Lefebvre, and all the people in that seminary came to Lefebvre and said, this guy's bad news. This guy sleeps with young men, gets them drunk, takes advantage of them. You got to throw this guy out. But they said Lefebvre was very fond of him. He was his friend. So he told Richard Williamson, watch him like a hawk. And then eventually he ordained him. Eventually this guy was convicted and thrown into jail, excommunicated, scumbag, pedo priest. So this is why you see why this conspiracy to take down Pope Francis. Everybody ignored what he was doing to stop child abuse. Everybody ignored these other child predators because they were all involved in this traditional movement. So they use, just like now I know a lot of traditional Catholics, they call themselves, either you're Catholic or you're not, but a lot of people would say, oh, I prefer the TLM, I prefer the traditional Mass, all that. That's awesome. Praise the Lord. If that gets you closer to Jesus, thank God. It's valid. It's beautiful. Praise the Lord. But just like God gave the Jews the law and the Pharisees used it, added to it, and weaponized it, and Jesus called them whitewashed tombs. Yeah, on the outside you look beautiful and religious, but on the inside you're dead, spiritually dead. Some of these actors that were conspiring to take down Francis knew, number one, to get the conservatives that weren't very religious, group them together with the communists, with the Clintons, and then the Catholics, make him look like an apostate, a heretic. And you've seen it over and over and over again. Oh, he's controlled by the Freemasons. Funny thing is, the guy who talked the most about it was Taylor Marshall. I'm just saying something to think about. This is a theory. This is not a proven conspiracy, this part, but this could play into this conspiracy very easily. I had the dates. Marshall was ordained. Now, I wrote these notes down. I'm not gonna. You can look it up. It's very easy. Marshall was ordained an Episcopal priest in the Episcopal Church, and 6 months later, he was received into the Catholic Church. Just think about that. You say, oh no, well, God showed him the truth. He had this supernatural vision, this mystical thing. God changed him. And these things happen. People get radically transformed by the Lord. But unlike the Catholic Church, who condemns Freemason, Pope Francis wrote a whole letter about you can't be a Catholic and Freemason. Episcopalians, they think Freemasons are good. There's a lot of Freemasons in the Episcopalian Church, and in fact, all these presidents that were Freemasons, if you look at their religion, like 99% of them were Episcopalian. So it's just kind of odd. This Episcopalian priest becomes Catholic 6 months after he's ordained and starts attacking the Pope. So the Anglicans broke away from the Pope, right? And then this Anglican comes back in the church, and he's this traditional Catholic, this whitewashed Catholic, beautiful, it's everything traditional. But he attacks the Pope day in and day out. And I always thought that was weird. I always thought, like 6 months. like RCA takes like a year. I don't know any RCA program. Even Dr. Scott Hahn had to go through RCA. Even Dr. Peter Crift. So it wasn't like, oh, well, he was a priest. He didn't have to go through RCIA. It's just really weird that this guy became a priest. I mean, becoming a priest is a big decision. I don't know how long he prayed about, how long he went to seminary, but it's not like a quick decision. And then he becomes a priest, and 6 months later, he's a Catholic. Just kind of odd. But then when I would point out his lies, like he would literally lie about what Pope Francis would say. So I give you a couple quick ones. The other day I was talking about the homosexual one. He's like, oh, he says homosexual is not a crime. And he starts reading in Leviticus where it says homosexual is an abomination. Romans 1 clearly says homosexual is a sin. Corinthians clearly says homosexual is a sin. And amen, that this is what the church teaches. But he kept saying, he was making it sound like Pope Francis says it's not a sin. And everybody in his comments are saying he's a heretic, he's not the Pope, and he didn't correct them. And I pointed out, I watched the interview, what he said when a reporter asked him straight up, is homosexuality a sin? He said, yes, homosexuality is a sin. The sin of omission, Taylor Marshall never said that. He led everybody to have bad feelings about our Pope. He said, yes, homosexuality is a sin, but it's not a crime that should be punishable by death. Because he was speaking at Muslim nations, and in Africa, there's like more than half of the nations, it's a death sentence. If they find out you're homosexual, they kill you. In other parts of Africa, it's a prison sentence for life. In the lenient parts of Africa, you can get up to 14 years. This is why he told the African priest, you don't have to enforce fiducial supplicants, because, the government's not gonna care if all you're doing is praying a prayer of actual grace to help these people to repent. They're gonna see, okay, oh, these guys are homosexuality. They just identify themselves. Off with their heads, So he took that out of context. Pope Francis literally said homosexuality is a sin. The video should have said Pope Francis says homosexuality is a sin. And all the readers, all his chat would have been different. Oh, praise the Lord. But no, he had them hate Pope Francis. In fact, he did 2 surveys. Do you believe Pope Francis is the real Pope, the valid Pope? The first survey was 51% said no. Second one was like 70% said no. You see how he conditioned his followers? Another lie where he actually said Pope Francis was a heretic. Pope Francis was talking off the cuff to some people about communion of the saints, and he was talking about the context I got was he was talking about Christians from other denominations, and he said we all share in the communion of the saints. He was talking about communion with each other, and then he said in this life we share in the communion of the saints. And he was like, that's heretical. You're saying they're going to be in heaven in communion with the saints. And that's not what he said. He left out an entire sentence or 2. I remember Catholic for Redneck said, wow, I believed him. He actually emailed me. He was like, wow, can't believe he took out those 2 sentences, because he looked it up. He thought I was wrong. And then about abortion, Pope Francis was the most pro-life, outspoken Christian leader of his time. He said abortion is the gravest of mortal sins. It's like hiring a hitman. And yet, when a reporter asked him about Roe v. Wade, he said, I don't know much about American law, Roe v. Wade. He said, but abortion is murder, and murder is never justified. So he took that out of context. Oh, you don't know about American law? And he starts bashing him like he was, and he made it seem like he was against the overturning of Roe v. Wade. It was bizarre. And then the biggest one, ironically, in 2018, when this email from Epstein, from Bannon to Epstein saying we got to take down Pope Francis, this was 2018, this email. A couple things went on. The Vatican released the report on McCarrick that led Pope Francis to laicize him. But in the report, it showed clearly, and Vigano's brother, I think his name is Lorenzo, verified that Vigano was a compulsive liar. Vigano was told by Pope Benedict to watch McCarrick and don't let him leave Washington. And in the report, they said he was very friendly with him. They literally had pictures of them with their rich friends, toasting champagne, partying, and whatever else they did alone together. We don't know. But Lorenzo, his brother, Vigano, Carlo Maria Vigano, the excommunicated man, who used to be the nuncio, his brother Lorenzo, in a court of law in Italy, said he was a compulsive liar. He lied to Pope Benedict about McCarrick, and he lied to Pope Benedict about me. You see, he was charged, convicted, and had to repay $2 million to his brother, because this guy Vigano is a thief as well as a liar, stole $2 million from his brother Lorenzo, a priest, and told Pope Benedict that his brother had a stroke, he was disabled, he needed to stay in Italy to take care of him. He said, I was in Chicago at the time. He outright lied to the Pope. So the guy's a liar and a thief. He also stole $300,000. You're like, that's a lot of money. Well, this guy Vigano is filthy rich. Carlo Maria Vigano is worth $30 million. Well, he was when he stole the money. He's probably worth more today. And his brother said he lied about that. He said, hey, don't tell anybody how much we're worth because I want to be a cardinal and that don't look good. You know, this Pope's all against greed and money, you know, Pope Francis. So 2018, Bannon tells Epstein, we're taking down the Pope. Vigano comes out and says, Pope Francis protected McCarrick. And everybody's getting mad at Pope Francis. Everybody's ignoring the 2018 report. Everybody's ignoring that Pope Francis lay aside McCarrick. Kind of odd. Also 2018, Pope Francis, who always reached out to the poor, and this was another reason, all these, so I'm not saying Marshall and Weston were involved in or they approved of child pornography, but they didn't talk about it because they didn't want to get the guys on their side in trouble. And could be because these guys financed them, because a big part of this was in that book, Merchants in the Temple, when Pope Francis took on the corrupt bankers and the corruption going on in the Vatican with the bank, he took on all the rich. He told the clergy, you know, the church is the church of the poor. We got to live like the poor. A lot of people didn't like that. You know, even our best cardinals were living in these humongous suites made for princes. You know, we call them our princes, so, you know, depends how you look at it. But he chose to live with the servants, you know, the servants' quarters. He chose to take this palace that they had plans. It was a billionaire heiress donated to the Vatican, and the Vatican was going to use it to make this fancy hotel because it was a fancy mansion and charge a lot of money for people staying at the Vatican. He said, no, we make this a palace of the poor. And homeless people live there now. This beautiful palace with expensive art. And they're fed, and Pope Francis eats with them. So he had a whole different outlook. So the rich and powerful were against him. And a lot of the rich and the powerful were finding out through the Epstein emails, like minors. So this is the conspiracy I see. So at 2018, Pope Francis reaches out to the Amazonians. These are Catholics that get to see a priest like every 2 years because there's a shortage of priests in the Amazon. He invites them to the Vatican. They're so thankful they give him gifts. And one of the gifts was a wooden carve out of a pregnant woman, it looked like a pregnant woman. And I clearly heard it when I watched the video. The woman said, this is Our Lady of the Amazon. To them, this represented Mary. Marshall quickly turns it around and said, this is a Pachamama idol. Now, religious scholars, Catholic and secular religious scholars came out and totally debunked this, that there's no Pachamama worship in that part of South America. That was like totally different part. These people wouldn't even, if they were pagans, they wouldn't even know who Pachamama was. However, they were Catholics. They were all devout Catholics. Every one of them. People investigated this. They were all devout Catholics. They said this is, and I was like, wow, are Catholics going to fall for this? I know they love Marshall, but are they going to fall? This was like lies that our Protestants, our extreme Protestant anti-Catholics, like Jack Chick would say, the Catholic Church worship idols. You know, the Pope worships idols. Catholics fell for it. And then I even showed a video. It was actually from another anti-Catholic, Catholic Pope hater, Peter Diamond, instead of Cantus. But he showed a side-by-side video of Marshall getting caught in a lie. And I showed it here, and I can't find it. I think someone said Marshall took him down. But I think Lofton and Trent Horn also showed the side-by-side. So this guy, Alexander Shuggle, threw the idols what they call the idols into the Tiber River. He stole them and threw them into the Tiber River. And then Marshall wakes up in the morning. It's like, it's really early. I just got a text. This is amazing. This young man threw these Pachamama idols into the Tiber River, and he starts talking about he's like a saint and all this, and he gets up, his hair is a little messy, he goes, oh yeah, I'm unshaven, I just woke up, it's like 5 a.m, whatever, and he's talking real quiet. And then they show, like, a couple weeks later, this guy's on his show getting interviewed, Alexander Shuggle, and he's like, what's your name? And the guy's like, Alexander. Well, Alexander Shuggle. So the guy's like, okay, maybe he's asking me my name for the audience. Like, he's looking at him funny. And then the whole time, Taylor's like, could have won an Academy Award. He's acting like he just met the guy. And the guy's like, well, maybe we should tell everybody our plan, how we met in Italy, and you paid me. You said to throw these in, and you'll pay me for my flight. And when I get into the air, to text you, And you could see in Marshall's face, he knew he got caught. He goes, well, I wasn't ready to tell them that yet. And he laughed. He goes, yeah, I guess we should tell you. We planned this. And then he spun it. He spun it like he did a good con spin. I was like, wow, this guy's a good con artist. He spun it real good. That this was a good thing they planned this, and he kept it secret. Oh, I had to keep it secret. But he was definitely caught dead to rights lying. Now, like I said, if you can find it, please post it for me, because I can't. I was going to show you guys, but I can't even find it anymore. So that was at 2018 too, when Epstein told Bannon, we're taking down the Pope. And I always wondered, what was the connection? Because John Henry Weston would go on Steve Bannon's War Room. This was like a political show. I'm like, why would John Henry Weston be on the War Room with Steve Bannon bashing the Pope? And Taylor Marshall would go on there too. I'm like, how does Taylor Marshall know Steve Bannon? This is so weird. Then you see Taylor Marshall go on a Mormon show, and Mormons believe. I mean, I know a lot of good Mormons are very moral, good people, but their religion is a cult, and they believe the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, and the Pope is the Antichrist. That's a Mormon belief, So he goes on a Mormon, Glenn Beck, even though it's not a religious show, he's a devout Mormon. He practices his faith, and he believes the Pope is the Antichrist. And Taylor Marshall's talking to this Mormon on national, it wasn't on TV, it was on YouTube, but it was a syndicated show. A lot of people watched it, and they're both calling the Pope the Antichrist. I was like, what the heck? Now I understand this conspiracy. So I was wrong. I always laugh at conspiracy theories, but, the Epstein files are pretty clear. This was a conspiracy to take down Pope Francis. And this is why they ignore all the wonderful things he did. Like, we had record church growth. Now they're reporting about it. Now they're talking about it, that Pope Francis is dead. But when I was talking about it, people were like, you're crazy, you're wrong. If I said these things then, 100 people would unsubscribe from me and curse me out. Now we're seeing it. Now we're seeing reports that in 2023, 90% of Catholic priests say they're conservative politically and Orthodox theologically. That same survey done in 1965, pre-Vatican II, it was reversed. Like 70% of priests said they were liberal progressive politically and liberal theologically. So we're seeing the fruits of Pope Francis now. Child abuse is no longer an issue. It's still an issue, but it's nowhere near what it was before Pope Francis. And they ignored all the miracles this guy was doing. I mean, you remember that little kid, I think his name was Bonavita, is an Italian kid, had a tumor in his head. Pope Francis prayed for his head. The tumor shrunk. Ave Cassidy, the little baby who had a hole in her heart, he put his hand on her heart, prayed for her heart. The heart shrunk. So many miracles I would report, and people were like, wow, I didn't know that. And they would look it up. Wow, that's crazy. These guys would ignore that and just tell you Pope Francis is a heretic. Pope Francis is an anti-pope. So if you want to prevent this, they're gonna eventually do the same thing with Leo, I imagine. So if you want to prevent this from happening, remember what they did to Pope Francis. Remember the anger and the hate they instilled in you, and obey canon law. If you're a Catholic, it's simple. It's very simple. Canon law 1373. One who publicly either stirs up hostilities or hatred among the subjects against the Apostolic See, the Pope, or against any ordinary of the bishops on account of some act of ecclesiastical power or ministry, something they said or did, or incites subjects to disobey them, yeah, don't disobey them. Don't go to the Novus Ordo Mass. You hear that all the time. You know, that's the SSPX official position. The Novus Ordo Mass is intrinsically evil. You know, we need bishops. Pope don't want to. The Pope don't want us to have them. We're gonna have them anyway. This is disobeying, and they're telling you to disobey them. If they do this, they're to be punished by interdict or by other just penalties. And if that's too much to think about, very simple. I always say KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Canon Law 1404. The first see, which is the Pope, is judged by no one. And this is, the saints knew this. The heretics always judge the popes. The saints never did. St. Teresa Avila said, if you have the choice of being right or being obedient, choose obedient. Catherine of Siena said, if Satan himself became the Pope, I wouldn't rise up against him. I would rest in him. And she was being hyperbolic. Satan could never be Pope, but it's not our job, the judge, to say, oh, this guy's Satan. And Padre Pio, who, when he was wrongly accused of lying, and he was punished. He was wrongly punished, and he was told he couldn't celebrate Mass publicly. His response was, the will of my superiors is the will of God. And when the people came and were furious because they loved St. Padre Pio, he scolded them. He said, don't you ever say a bad word about the Pope. Now go home and pray and repent and pray for the Pope. Because they were mad at the Pope for doing this to him. Compare that to today, the modernists today, who Pope Pius X warned us about in his letter to love the Pope, where he said the modernists want to criticize the Pope. They want to say, oh, the Pope didn't say that clearly enough. He said, to dissent from the Pope, you cannot be holy. You cannot be holy and dissent from the Pope. Compare that today. Now, all these guys on YouTube are modernists. And the modernist priest, and again, they project. They say they're the traditionalists and we're the modernists. But you never see in tradition popes acting, or saints acting like these heretics. James Altman. Father James Altman. Father James Altman, when he was told not to celebrate his Mass publicly, a lot of his followers felt unjust. So what did they do? Did he act like Padre Pio? Did he act like a saint or a heretic? Well, he called Pope Francis an antichrist and said he should have a millstone thrown around his neck and killed and go straight to hell. And nothing would make him more happy than Pope Francis getting killed and going straight to hell. So he justified it, said, because it'll lead less souls to hell, because he's leading a lot of souls to hell. And then what did he do? He celebrates Mass publicly. And what did his followers do? Donated to his GoFundMe. Oh yeah, of course the grift was on. Started to GoFundMe immediately, and within a month had over $1 million. Bought a house, bought the finest whiskey. He likes whiskey. It was a grift. It was disobedience. It was heretical. He's not a saint. He will never be a saint unless he repents. So don't be like these heretics bashing the Pope that are praising Epstein. Be a saint and stay Catholic.